The agenda, which is the review of the September 2019 financial report. Rich.
So we did provide a memo highlighting, so we'll just kind of give an overview of the financials through September, and then we'll kind of head into the PowerPoint and then the transfers that are going to be before the board. So right now we are showing a year-end forecast of $362,796 to the positive. It breaks out as $564,467 for all ERCs except special ed to the positive, and right now special ed and ELP combined are a negative $201,672. Similar to last month, Darien High School has a salary savings forecast of $11,547, and that is due to an FMLA leave of absence. Middlesex, RC3, also has a salary savings due to a leave of absence of $41,885. Similar to last month, we would anticipate probably having to move that to long-term substitutes at some point during the year. In RC15 technology, we are projecting a small deficit of $17,094. That is due to personal property taxes assessed on the copier lease. So the copiers are leased, so they are owned by CIT. So the town does assess them as part of their personal property tax rolls. And the contract does call for the district to reimburse CIT for that personal property tax. It is $8,700 for personal property tax in 2017, and a little over $8,300 in personal property tax for 2018. Moving to RC18 personnel, we do have, as we mentioned last month, staff turnover savings of $91,236. So this is the amount over and above the $400,000 that was budgeted. The certified column change does have an available forecast of $57,250, which was similar to last month. Budget control again remains untouched at $263,360. For special ed, RC24, we are again forecasting teacher salary savings of $116,000. We did want to highlight in the forecast the ESY PPT line item. We are forecasting that right now to be a deficit of $51,325. There are still 3 days of ESY for the upcoming ESY that will be expensed in June. This account has actually been a negative variance for each of the last 3 fiscal years. This is new, and we wanted to highlight this for the Finance Committee and the Board. There is going to be a need for 5 additional paraprofessional support at 3 of our elementary schools due to student IEPs. This is in part due to students entering the district who did have one-to-one paras in their IEPs, and that has to carry forward. So we aren't making a recommended transfer just yet. We'll probably do that in the October report, but we did want to highlight what that would be, and it would be about $195,000 salary overage. Tuition public schools is also forecasted to be over budget by $143,000. There were 2 placements made beyond budget to date, which drive this forecast, so we would anticipate bringing a transfer forward in the October financial report for that. The forecast for heating oil, again, we had this last month, is negative $81,352. We aren't recommending a transfer at this point. The heating season really has just begun. We do have a fixed price per gallon of $2.36 per gallon. It's really an overage assumed due to consumption. So in previous years, the district has consumed about 207,000 gallons a year in heating oil. At the budget that we have in place and the price per gallon fixed cost, that would be about 181,000 gallons. So either consumption will have to go lower, or we would have to make a transfer into that account to cover that overage. So we'll monitor that as the year progresses. Water right now is relatively flat, but a small negative forecast of $6,000. Electricity is currently forecasted to a positive forecast of $127,000. Sewer cost, which is the other transfer for the month, is forecasted to exceed the budget by $11,722. The sewer rates have increased from $5.65 to $6.10. Discussed at the previous Finance Committee meeting, we do have savings in property insurance, workers' compensation insurance, general liability insurance, and student accident insurance, totaling just over $87,000. So one of the transfers that will be recommended is to take a portion of those savings to cover the personal property taxes for the copiers and then the sewer costs as well. We have received Medicaid reimbursement revenue of just over $1,300. So you can see the breakdown just of, actually ELP, I'm sorry. Yep, so RC26, we do have 2 unfilled para positions in the ELP program. Those savings total about $72,000. It is anticipated that the savings from these paras will be used to cover the paraprofessionals in RC 24 for special education. If it does come down throughout the year that maybe those paras would have to be filled maybe in the winter, then we would have to consider another transfer to backfill that if we were to take those funds to fill the RC 24 paraprofessionals. So you can see the breakdown of where all the RCs stand. It is again a 362,796 positive forecast for the year. So the two transfers that we would...
I'm sorry, before we move on to the transfers, can we maybe give people an opportunity to ask questions on those items? So I think we'll just work back through the memo. So does anyone have any question about the RC1 savings, $11,547? No? Okay. Anything on our RC3, the Middlesex, the FML leave of absences, savings? I do have a question that you mentioned that we're going to have to make an adjustment to long-term substitutes. So could you just elaborate on why that would be needed and when you feel that would be coming?
So if we have a teacher who's out on a long-term leave, you typically code the expense to long-term substitutes. The budgeted position is within the RC salary line for the given teacher. So the savings are accruing within the RC actual salary account, but the expense for the coverage for that substitute is in the long-term substitute account. So really the two kind of converge so that you don't have necessarily an overage, but it does cross RCs.
Okay. So at some point we'll see that adjustment.
Correct.
In the substitutes. Okay. And then RC 15, anybody have any questions about that? That's going to be one of our transfers today.
It may be that the town may be able to exempt us from this. Is that correct?
So we do owe the existing payments because they weren't exempted. The town did assess property tax. CIT did have to pay it. Going forward, we did reach out to the assessor's office to see if they could exempt the copiers from their personal property tax. So we're just waiting to hear whether that be the case.
Okay, so that was going to be my question, that item. Is this something that we have budgeted in our current budget? And
no, it is not.
Okay, so that's definitely something that we need to look
Correct.
at
So
going
either
forward.
we would have to request that the town take the copiers off the personal property tax assessment, and then going forward we wouldn't have to budget it or pay it, or if they are unwilling to take it off the personal property tax assessment, we would have to add in the property tax going forward.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions on that? So RC 18, the personnel, we have a forecast, available forecast. Any questions on that?
At some point, I just would love to see staff turn over the assumptions that we built in so we know how good our forecasting is on that number.
Sure.
And what it's based on.
Sure. The district did budget $400,000 in savings. I can look to see what the methodology is. Typically, the majority of your salary savings would come, or turnover savings would come from teacher turnover. So you would typically budget a certain lane and step on the teacher grid as someone leaving, and then a replacement step multiplied by, let's say, 20 or 25 teachers or whatever it might be. So I can see if there is that detail and bring it forward.
Thank you.
Anything else on that RC 18? So then RC 24. Any questions on that?
Yeah, similarly, I'd love for us to be looking long-term at, one of the major conversations in special education is variability. So I'd love to know where we hit variability, like what does it look like for paraprofessionals? What does it look like for our major drivers in special education? But it looks like this year paraprofessionals might be a good place to look. And of course that impacts budget control or other transfers. So just so as we are budgeting and thinking about special education, we can begin to understand how much variance we would typically see in what types of categories.
Sure.
Sure, Mike?
Just so I understand the process. So there were families that came into town that we had no idea were coming into town, and then quite properly let us know that they have IEPs, and so we fulfill those needs as well we should. How do you even predict that with 4,400 plus students that 3 are going to come in, or 5 are going to come in, or 7 are going to come in that are going to need those services? That would be an extraordinary algorithm, which I
It'd be great to have it.
Mr. Burke, the answer is you don't. In many ways you don't for that, because otherwise I mean, otherwise you're building in buffers into budgets and so on and so forth, and I don't think that that's what we're going to be doing, so.
No, I agree.
Agreed, thank you.
So just to follow up on that, so at this point, we have higher than expected needs in special ed. So that would mean at some point, some of this might be potentially an ECR, excess cost reimbursement. Would we see potentially funds coming in
Sure.
related to these students?
So in terms of the paras, probably not. In terms of the public school tuition, one will likely fall below the threshold. We're waiting to confirm what the transportation cost would be for the second, and it could be roughly around that threshold. The state hasn't issued their NCEP for the year, which is their net current expenditures per pupil. We would expect that 4.5 multiple, which is the threshold to receive excess costs, to be right around $97,000, $98,000. So excess cost typically works in a way where you'd have to spend up to that threshold, so in this case the $97,000 or $98,000, and then the state would reimburse you usually 72 cents on the dollar above that amount.
Right.
So the entitlement cap, which is at 72 to 73 cents per dollar, is usually issued roughly mid-December. So I've been sitting down with Shirley and some of the other members in the special education department. We're looking at her non-public school tuition account, her excess cost account, her contracted services and consulting services. Typically, the accounts that you would end up receiving reimbursement that really drives the variability within special ed are your two tuition accounts, your contracted services accounts, and your consulting account.
Okay, so there potentially may be a positive impact.
You could get a small amount of revenue for that
Okay.
tuition.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions on RC 24? Moving on to RC 25 for fixed. Does anyone have any questions on those items? So I just to follow up on what you had stated, and I was just jotting down to make sure I got everything right. So typically we assume our consumption was 181,000?
So based on the $2.36 or so price per gallon, the budget, if you were just take the budget and divide it by that,
Right.
that gets you to about 181,000 gallons
Right.
of use. Looking back at what the last couple of fiscal years have been, you've really been in that 200 to 207,000 gallons
Okay.
of use. So really, we have to see whether or not there was alternate reasons as to why the budget was slightly less. Are we consuming more, and are we consuming more in certain schools? I do know there are natural gas lines
Right,
that
I
were
was gonna
installed,
ask
so
that.
that
Is there
could
that-
certainly play a part in it.
Okay.
As of right now, we're kind of, for the forecast purposes, leaving what we've historically used as consumption for gallons, and then as the heating season kind of kicks up, we can true that up or true that down depending on how it materializes. If you have a very warm winter, typically your usage will be down, and then that negative variance might not materialize. If we have a very cold winter, it could materialize, or it could even materialize more. It really depends on the weather.
Right, okay. But there could be a positive impact.
It could.
From natural gas.
It could have a
Or you might
positive.
not just utilize as much as you're.
Correct, and if we were to look at the utilities just kind of as a whole, the electricity savings would probably offset that fuel oil savings if the consumption was to stay at around that 207,000 gallons.
Right, okay. And then that wouldn't really require a transfer? That
Correct,
just
it would
be-
stay in the broad category.
Okay. Any other questions on RC 25? Okay, and then just RC 26. Any questions on those items? Okay, so we can move on. We can talk about any other questions on the financial detail that were provided? So we can then move on to the budget transfers, and we can discuss those now.
Sure. So there will be two transfers for the Board of Ed to consider at their next board meeting. The first one is to address the personal property tax on the copiers. So again, the total cost of those two personal property tax years is $17,094. As we mentioned before, we do have savings within workers' compensation of approximately $50,000. So we would be recommending taking a portion of that savings to cover the personal property tax in the copier account.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, the next transfer?
So the next one is for the sewer cost. As we mentioned earlier, the sewer rate did go up to $6.10, up from about $5.65. So the cost is the $11,722, and then again, we would be recommending to take a portion of those savings from the balance in workers' compensation.
Any questions on that? Okay. And then it's basically, hopefully everybody reviewed the information in the packet. And then we didn't go over your,
We can go through the PowerPoint if we want.
Yeah.
So this is what we'll present at the board meeting in October. Again, the financials are separated between salaries, operating expenses, fixed expenses, and revenue. As we talked about, we are showing a favorable forecast of $362,796, which is about 0.36% of the budget. So if we recall the budget that just previously ended, we ended with about a 0.34 forecast, so it's pretty much right in line with what we saw in the previous year. Salaries, we did go through these in the memo, but the positive variance in salaries is $406,000. It's largely attributed to budget control, the salary savings in classroom teacher for special education, turnover savings, the ELP paras, the column change account, and then the FML leave of absences at the middle school and the high school. We do have the projected overages for ESY and PPT, and then the 5 special education paras that we talked about. Operating expenses, we do have a negative variance of $160,438. It's really driven by the personal property taxes for the copiers, that if the board approves the transfer, then that'll obviously be offset. And then the tuition in the public schools for special education of $143,000. Fixed cost does show a positive variance of $114,000. That's largely due to the savings in electricity, but we do have some categories: property insurance that we mentioned, workers' compensation, general liability, student accident insurance, and then the aggregate of heat, electric, and water is a positive. We do have the one negative item in the sewer service, which is the transfer for the board to approve at its next meeting. Revenues, right now we're leaving it forecasted relatively flat, though we did receive, again, Medicaid reimbursement revenue of about $1,300, which is an unbudgeted revenue item, so that's a net positive to the overall budget. We are monitoring excess costs, and so excess cost is received in 2 installments. 75% comes in February, and then the balance comes at the end of May. And then these were the 2 transfers that we just discussed that'll be for board approval at the October meeting.
okay, that's great.
That'll be a good presentation.
That's great. Very good. So any other questions on the transfers? Then I'll move to public comment. Seeing none, motion to adjourn. All in favor? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.